Sign over 50%, or I ruin your company tonight, my father said, throwing the papers across the glass table in my conference room after 6 years of silence. My mother sat beside him like this was reasonable. My brother Nolan leaned back in his chair with that lazy smile I had not seen in years, the one that always showed up right before he tried to take credit for something he did not build. Then I smiled too. Not because I was afraid, not because I was cornered. I smiled because the 3 people who cut me out of their lives for 6 years had just walked into the one building in Boston where I could finally make them tell the truth. My name is Celia Hart. I am 32 years old, and I own North River Risk Advisory. We do risk reviews, litigation support, background checks on leadership teams, and financial diligence for banks, private funds, and companies that want to know who they are really doing business with before they sign anything expensive. That Tuesday had been quiet until my assistant Nora knocked on my office door and said there were 3 people downstairs claiming to be my family. For a second, I just looked at her. Family. That word had not belonged to me in a long time. Who exactly? I asked. She hesitated. Your parents and a man who says he is your brother. The room felt smaller after that. Not because I was scared of them. I was long past being scared of them. It was because 6 years is a long time to hear nothing. Not a call, not a birthday text, not even a cheap holiday message sent out of obligation. 6 years of being treated like I had stopped existing. Then one ordinary afternoon they walked into my company like they still had a key to my life. I told Nora to put them in the small conference room near the center hall. I stood up, closed the report on my desk, and walked out of my office. As I crossed the floor, my team kept working, heads down, screens glowing, phones buzzing softly, everything orderly and earned. I had built that calm, one contract at a time, one sleepless quarter at a time, one client at a time. There was nothing in that room my family had helped create. Not the first desk, not the first payroll run, not the first lease, not the first client presentation where I stood there with a dry throat and pretended I was not terrified. By the time I reached the glass door, I already knew one thing. They had not come back because they missed me. I opened the door. My father was at the head of the table. My mother sat to his right. Nolan sat across from the empty chair that should have been mine, one ankle resting over a knee like he was waiting for a lunch meeting, not a shakedown. My father looked around the room and nodded once. Nice place, he said. Bigger than I expected. Nolan gave a short laugh. Not bad for somebody who could not handle real business. I stayed near the door. You should not be here, I said. What do you want? My father did not answer right away. He reached into a leather folder, pulled out a stack of papers, and slapped them down on the table. The sound bounced off the glass walls. Then he shoved the papers toward me. Sign it, he said. I walked to the table, but I did not sit. I looked down. Transfer of equity, voting rights, integration language. A proposed strategic partnership that somehow gave Nolan 50% of my company and a path into operational control. I looked up at him. 50%. Nolan spread his hands like he was explaining something generous to a child. My firm needs a stronger platform. Yours has the credibility. This helps both of us. You walked into my company after 6 years, I said, and asked for half of it. My father leaned back. We did not ask. My mother finally spoke soft and smooth like she was trying to wrap poison in silk. Your brother needs support right now. This is what families do. I looked at her for the first time. Families usually call before they need something. Her expression tightened just for a second. Nolan tapped the top page with one finger. Let us not turn this into drama. Sign the deal clean and simple. We fold the firms together, stabilize the market view, and everyone wins. Market view. There it was. Not love, not regret, not reconciliation, reputation, access, borrowed, credibility. And I flipped a few more pages. The form was worse than it looked on top. A control grant disguised as support. Enough governance rights to interfere with hiring clients, capital allocations, and future financing. It was greedy on the surface. And greedy people usually hide something deeper under the first layer. I set the papers down and met my father's eyes. Why would I do this? He leaned forward, hands flat on the table. Because if you do not, I call your largest client tonight and tell them exactly what kind of person you are. I tell them you built your career on other people's work. I tell them your own brother was the real mind behind everything, and that you took what never belonged to you. I ruin your company tonight. The room went still. My mother looked at me like she expected panic. Nolan looked pleased with himself, like the hard part was over. I felt the old anger rise for exactly 1 second. Then it passed. Because threats only work when the other person does not already know where the weakness is. And I knew where theirs was. If you were me, would you throw them out or ask why they suddenly needed me now? I smiled and pushed the papers back an inch. Then stay for the meeting, Dad, I said. I want everyone to hear this. For the first time since I walked in, all 3 of them looked confused. My father frowned. What meeting? A 50% ownership change does not happen in a private room, I said. If Nolan wants in, he can present the deal properly. Leadership team, outside, counsel, diligence review. Everyone. Tonight, Nolan turned to my father, then back to me. You are serious. Very, I said. He started smiling again. Good, fine, let us do it professionally. My mother relaxed at once. See, I told you she would calm down. Calm was not the word for what I felt. Cold was closer. I walked them to the elevator myself. Nolan stopped just before the doors closed and gave me the same smug look he used to wear when we were younger, back when he still thought confidence and competence were the same thing. Family always wins in the end, he said. The elevator doors shut. Then I turned and walked straight to my office without breaking stride. Nora was already up. So were Ethan, my chief operating officer, and Priya, who led our diligence team that quarter. Dean Mercer, our outside counsel, had been in the building for a different matter and was still one floor up with 2 partners from a client review. I shut the office door behind us. I need the large conference room at 7, I said. Full leadership. Dean too. And pull the Nolan Hart Capital intake file, the red flag memo, the bridge debt notes, the litigation screening, all of it. Ethan gave me a sharp look. You already had a file on them. Not on them, I said. On him. 3 weeks earlier, one of our fund clients had asked us to do a preliminary screen on a group of regional firms that might come looking for rescue money before the quarter closed. Nolan Hart Capital had been on that list. Priya had built a preliminary risk memo from public filings, broker materials, vendor references, litigation databases, and prior pitch documents that had circulated in the market. The second Dean saw the name, he flagged it for me. He had not known Nolan was my brother until after I told him, but by then the memo was already real. And the memo told a story. Bridge debt coming due fast. Pressure from an investor who claimed restricted capital had not been used the way it was described. Sales materials with numbers that shifted depending on who was reading them. A business begging for credibility from outside because it was bleeding it from the inside. Priya nodded once. I will bring the full deck. Bring the proposed transfer papers too, I said. Dean is going to want every page, especially the back half. He already will, Dean said from the doorway. He stepped in carrying his laptop bag, calm as ever. He had silver at the temples, the kind of voice that made nervous people tell the truth faster than they planned. He looked at my face once, and then at the folder on my desk. Family, he said. Yes. Asking or taking? Taking, I said. 50%. He let out a slow breath through his nose. Then we keep this narrow and factual. That was why I trusted Dean. He never confused clean with weak. While the room started moving around me, I stood still for 1 second and saw the old house in my head. 6 years earlier, Nolan and I had both been working around the edges of a small analytics company started by one of his friends. They had an idea for a risk-scoring product. I built the framework that made the thing useful. I wrote the early logic, the decision trees, the pattern flags, the reporting flow. Nolan liked to meet investors and talk in smooth circles until people forgot to ask whether he understood the product at all. At first, I thought we were doing what siblings were supposed to do. I built, he pitched. We both won. Then one evening, I arrived early to a meeting and heard Nolan speaking through a partly closed door. He was telling a room full of potential investors that the system was his vision. He said I had helped with technical implementation, but the model, the real insight, the thing that made the company investable was his. I stood there listening until I could not feel my hands. After the meeting, I confronted him in the hall. That framework is mine, I said. He barely looked at me. Investors need a clear story. The truth is a clear story, I said. He laughed. Not in the real world? That night, I went to our parents' house. I thought they would stop him. I thought there was still some line he could not cross without them seeing it. Instead, my father said Nolan understood people better than I did. My mother said I should stop competing with my brother and learn how to support him. Nolan sat there on the couch, one arm draped across the back cushion like he had known how it would go before I even walked in. The next morning, I left the company. Then I waited for someone to call. Nobody did. Weeks passed. Then months. Then years. I built my life from freelance work, contract analysis, ugly invoices, borrowed office space, and every quiet humiliation that comes with starting over when no one thinks you are the one who mattered. It took me 6 years to build North River into something no one could question. And it had taken Nolan exactly 1 elevator ride to walk in and try to steal part of it. Priya came back in with the memo and a printed litigation packet. Ethan had the leadership list locked. Dean was already reading through the transfer papers my father had thrown at me. At page 7, he stopped. There it is, he said. I came around the desk. Priya and Ethan moved in too. It was not obvious at first glance. The front pages talked about synergy integration, stabilization, strategic efficiency. But buried in the operating provisions and transition language was a clause chain that let the combined structure absorb certain prior obligations if operations were deemed integrated after transfer. Another section created a path for cross-support on financing events under what they called temporary restructuring accommodation. Dean tapped the paragraph once. In plain English, he said, if you sign this clean version and then let operations touch, they will argue your company shares the burden for obligations already hanging over his. They are not only taking equity, they are trying to build a bridge from his liabilities into your house. I looked at the page again. Not a partnership, a transfer of rot. They did not come back because they needed a daughter. They came back because they needed a firewall with my name on it. When people only remember your name when they need it, do you save them or let the file speak? If you like revenge that moves this quietly, subscribe now and stay with me. At 6:45, I walked into the large conference room while my team finished setting up. The wall screen was ready. Leadership had taken seats. Dean sat near the far end with his laptop open. Priya had her notes. Ethan had the room list. 2 senior partners from a client review were still in the building and had been invited to stay because the ownership discussion could affect upcoming work. Everything about the room said process, not family drama. That was exactly what I wanted. At 7 on the dot, my family arrived. My father walked in first, carrying himself like a man who thought a larger audience would make his leverage stronger. My mother followed with that polished expression people wear when they want credit for restoring peace they never tried to protect. Nolan came in, smiling, and started shaking hands before he had even sat down. I stood at the head of the table. Thank you all for staying late, I said. There is a proposed ownership transaction I want reviewed in full before any discussion continues. My father jumped in before I could say another word. A simple family restructuring, he said. Good for the company, good for everyone involved. Nolan slid into his chair and nodded. My firm brings reach investor access and expansion options. In exchange, I take 50% and step into the structure where I can actually help scale this place. No one in the room said anything. That silence must have felt like approval to him, because he kept going. He talked about positioning. He talked about market pressure and long-term strength. He talked about how his relationships would help North River move faster into bigger rooms. He did not mention his debt. He did not mention investor pressure. He did not mention why a man with so much value to offer needed to walk into his sister's office and threaten her into signing by nightfall. I folded my hands and waited until he was done. Then I looked at him and said, before we go any further, I want a few basic confirmations on the record. He smiled. Of course. Your company has no material debt exposures that have not been fully disclosed in your proposal packet. Correct, he said. No active investor dispute, likely to result in a significant payment demand holdback or legal action. Correct. No current concerns from lenders or counterparties that could trigger a short-term restructuring event. Correct. All core product architecture and related intellectual property used by your firm are cleanly owned and free of meaningful challenge. His smile tightened a little there, but he still said correct. And the transfer structure you brought to me this afternoon does not create any path, direct or indirect, for prior obligations from your side to migrate into mine. He gave the answer too fast. Correct. My father waved a hand, annoyed by what he thought was delay. Do we really need a courtroom before a signature, he said. If the deal is good, sign it. That was the moment I knew he still had no idea what room he was actually sitting in. If someone threatened your name to steal what you built, would you expose them now or let them lie one more minute? I turned to Priya. Please put the memo up. The first slide appeared on the wall. Nolan stopped smiling. Priya kept her voice even. Preliminary risk screen on Nolan Hart Capital, she said. Built from broker materials, public debt filings, litigation review vendor references, and submitted transaction language. Slide 2 showed the debt schedule. Bridge obligations maturing in less than 2 months, she said. 1 secured filing tied to receivables. 1 lender notice that indicates elevated risk if replacement capital is not secured quickly. Nolan sat forward. This is preliminary, he said. Yes, I said. And you still just confirmed in front of this room that no material debt exposure existed beyond your disclosure packet. Dean took over. Slide 3. An investor dispute timeline appeared. There was no need to oversell it. The dates did the work. A notice from counsel. A demand. Documented disagreement over the use and presentation of restricted funds raised for a growth initiative. My father looked from the screen to Nolan. What is that? Nolan answered without looking at him. It is nothing. It is a disagreement, not a case. Dean spoke before he could keep going. A material dispute does not need a filed case to matter in diligence, he said. It needs risk, and risk is present. The room had changed by then. You could feel it. Nobody was looking at Nolan like a future partner anymore. They were looking at him like an unstable input. Priya moved to the next slide. This page compared broker materials sent into the market with debt and growth assumptions that did not line up cleanly with current filing data. Optimistic language was one thing. This crossed into another category. Nolan pushed back from the table. This is ridiculous. Not yet, I said. We are still on the easy part. Then I stood up and walked to the screen myself. 6 years ago, I said my brother told investors that the core framework behind his first real product vision was his. He said I had helped with technical execution. He said the real insight belonged to him. I clicked once. On the wall appeared an old draft from my archived files dated time-stamped and saved long before the meeting where I first heard him retell my work as his own. Beside it sat excerpts from later materials tied to his current firm language, so close in structure and logic that even Ethan, who had not known me back then, turned his head and stared. I did not say copyright. I did not say theft. I did not need to. I only needed the room to see the pattern. You are still standing on work you stripped from me, I said. And today you walked into my company asking for 50% of what I built after you did it. Nolan looked at Dean, then at the screen, then back at me. You cannot prove that means anything legally. Tonight I do not need to prove everything I said. I only need this room to understand the quality of the person asking to enter our cap table. My mother finally found her voice. This is family. You do not do this to family in front of strangers. I turned to her. Strangers, I said, do not erase you for 6 years and then return with signature pages. She looked down. I walked back to the table and picked up the exact folder my father had thrown at me that afternoon. Now for the part that matters most, I said. I handed it to Dean. He opened it to the flagged pages. The front of the proposal, he said, reads like a standard transfer with operating integration. The back half does something very different. If Miss Hart signs and if post-transfer operations are integrated in any meaningful way, multiple clauses create a path for shared exposure tied to prior obligations on the Nolan Hart side. This document does not simply request equity. It attempts to build structural access to liabilities already in motion. The room went dead quiet. Ethan asked the question everyone else was thinking. In plain English. Dean did not look away from Nolan when he answered. In plain English, he said they are trying to move a burning roof over her head and call it support. My father opened his mouth, then shut it again. Nolan stood up too fast and his chair hit the floor behind him. That is a hostile interpretation. No, I said. It is the part you hoped I would not read. My mother looked at the pages like she had never seen them before. Maybe she had not. Maybe my father had not either. But Nolan had. You did not come here to save family, I said. You came here because your lenders are breathing down your neck. Your investor problem is growing teeth, and you needed my company to absorb the risk before someone else put the whole picture together. My father snapped then. You are humiliating us. I looked straight at him. You cut me out of this family 6 years ago, Dad. Tonight you just found out you do not get to walk back in and bill me for what he broke. Nobody moved. Nobody even pretended to. That was the silence my thumbnail had promised. Not shock from a scream. Not silence from confusion. The kind that drops when every lie in a room has just lost oxygen at the same time. My father stared at me like I had spoken in a language he did not understand. My mother had gone pale. Nolan was standing, breathing hard, with no words left that sounded like power. Dean closed the folder. From this point forward, he said, any contact regarding Miss Hart North River Risk Advisory, or any proposed transaction, will go through counsel. I also strongly recommend you make no further representations in the market tying this firm to yours in any way. Ethan nodded toward the door. Security was already there. My father found one sentence at last. You will regret this. No, I said. This is the first time I let the file answer for me. Nolan bent to grab his bag, but not before he looked at me one last time. There was rage there, but beneath that was something better. Recognition. For the first time in his life, he knew he was not in a room he controlled. Security walked them out without touching them. They did not fight. People only fight loudly when they still think noise can save them. By then, they knew it could not. The door closed. Nobody spoke for a second. Then one of the client partners still in the room looked at me and said quietly, I understand your standards even better now. That mattered more than any apology my family could ever have invented. The meeting ended. Priya started gathering her papers. Ethan stayed behind just long enough to ask if I was all right. I thought about it. 6 years earlier, I had stood in a hallway begging people who were supposed to love me to admit the truth about what Nolan had done. Tonight I had not begged for anything. I had just opened the file. I am better than all right, I said. When the floor finally emptied out and the office went quiet, I stood alone by the glass and looked down at the street. My family had come for 50% of my company. They had come to use my name as a shield, my structure as a hiding place, and my work as a rescue line for the son they had always chosen first. They left with none of it. No signature, no cover, no access, no control. And maybe that was the strangest part. I did not feel triumphant the way movies teach you to expect. I did not feel loud. I felt clear. They had spent 6 years teaching me I was on my own. Tonight they learned what that had cost them. If you like revenge where the file speaks louder than the family name, subscribe and stay with me for the next one.